This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Correllian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your uh, questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They will appear here in my chat room. And I am looking once again at narrowing some of the pages that this broadcast appears on in order to have greater control of the numbers. So I would appreciate it if you could tell me what page you watch on to help me decide which pages to keep it on. Also, if you enjoy Midday with Reverend Don, please consider sharing it uh, on your own page. I want to narrow some of the pages I personally put it out on and increase this by having viewers share it. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. So I hope that you'll help me with that. And I hope you're having a lovely day. And our subject today is the upcoming solar eclipse and what we're going to be doing for it. So in our program today, we're going to be talking about the nature of solar eclipses, metaphysically speaking. We're going to be talking about the crystal web. We're going to be talking about the history of the crystal web and solar eclipses and ritual, as well as the ritual we'll be doing for the upcoming solar eclipse. And hello to Antonio in the chat room. The crystal web, hello to Bimby in the chat room. The crystal web, if you're not already familiar with it, and if you regularly follow Midday with Reverend Don, you presumably are already familiar with it, but some of you will not be, is the largest psychic engine ever constructed. It is a global network created of crystal access points around the world. It is literally around the world, even having two access points in Antarctica, owing to witch school members who were in Antarctica many years ago and created them. And so the crystal web really is all over the world, and it is a psychic engine that works together to gather and focus energy for things like healing, communication, etc. And people use the crystal web in an individual way to help to act as an energetic battery for their personal workings. And hello to Janet in the chat room, and hello to Brian in the chat room. And we also use it collectively for mass workings of various sorts. One of the things we've often used it for are attunements with solar and lunar eclipses. And this goes back to, I want to say 1992, when we did the first one, and we had the ceremony here in Danville at Greenwood House, which no longer exists, but the crystal access point that was established that day still exists. And Lady Crystal led that ceremony along with myself to align with the solar eclipse that was happening at that time. We also have done a number of others over the years. Hello to Renee in in the chat room. And Renee says she watches this on Corellian TV, if I understand correctly. And that is certainly a page I intend to continue to broadcast this on. Um, why have we done so many rituals around solar eclipses? I believe we have a couple of them that have been filmed that were broadcast at the time that are still in our archives at Corellian TV, formerly Magic TV. So you can actually see them still. And the answer has to do with what a solar eclipse is metaphysically about. And I will tell you that, well, historically, solar eclipses were considered to herald important events that were coming. Um, and they were interpreted in different ways. But to me, a solar eclipse represents that chaos moment that I often talk about, the moment when the normal patterns of life are disrupted. Our normal pattern of life is the sun shines throughout the day. A solar eclipse is a vast disruption of that pattern. And historically, it's really taken people's attention when it happens. A lunar eclipse is a similar event with the moon, um, but it has somewhat different connotations. But a solar eclipse has to do with worldly matters, sometimes political matters, certainly with the things that we do in our daily lives. So when we have a solar eclipse, it's allowing us a chance to really change and accentuate the patterns that we're working with, to focus on what we wish to see develop. Um, we have often historically connected it to the idea of working with the great dragon of the universe, which is a way of describing the Tao or the flow of the energy of the universe. Back in 1991, I believe, we did a ritual play called Calling the Dragon. And there is, I believe, an audio podcast recreating that mystery play on Blog Talk Radio. But the idea, and we have this also in our psychic exercises, working with that dragon energy. The idea is to focus on being at one with the energies of the universe and putting forth the things that you wish to manifest in a way that is flowing with the energies of the universe. And hello to Mary in the chat room. And this is part of the way that I look at solar eclipses, that the momentary disappearance of the sun is the disruption of the pattern, which can end any negative aspects of existing patterns and allow new positive aspects to be brought in. Now, of course, what it actually ends and begins depends entirely on how people align with it. It can just as easily end the positive and create negative if that's where your focus is. Now, one of the things we've talked about a lot is the Corellian Peace Campaign. The Corellian Peace Campaign is based on the idea that there are a number of people in the world who are trying to do some fairly negative things with energy, trying to sow hatred and discord for their own purposes. Um, those powers may very well use the solar eclipse in a different way. We want to use it to further those energies of peace and love and global rebirth. So the ritual that we will be doing will be focused in that direction. But let me talk a little bit about this particular solar eclipse. And this eclipse will be on April 8th of 2024, a little over a month from now. And it will be on a Monday. So almost exactly a month from now. And it's being called the Great North American Eclipse, or various versions on that, which is a little hyperbolistic, but still, yeah. The reason some people are calling that is that it's going to be visible throughout North America, in Mexico, in the United States, in Canada, and it has a diagonal path through these three countries of North America, and in certain places you will be able to see the full eclipse um, in these places. Now, um, I understand that here in Danville we'll be seeing a partial eclipse. That does not change the metaphysics of it. In Indiana, in Indianapolis, and I understand you'll see the full effect of the eclipse. But with the energy of a solar eclipse does not require you to see it at all. It's an astrological aspect. Um, and a solar eclipse um, is an astrological aspect that occurs at a particular time, um, extends through a particular time in its umbra, and whether you can see it, whether you don't see it, the effects are still the same. This one um, will be the first solar eclipse to be visible in the provinces of Canada since 1979, and the first in Mexico since 1991. In the United States, it's only the first since 2017. But it will be the only total solar eclipse in the 21st century whose totality will be visible in Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And the last solar eclipse visible in the contiguous United States until 2044. So in that sense, it's kind of a big deal. Um, Again, it doesn't really matter if you can see it, whether you can take advantage of the effects. So this is a worldwide event. Um, but if you happen to be under the path of the eclipse and you can actually see it, of course, the energy will be a little greater for you. Certainly the excitement may be a little for you. And it's always a bit of a social event for people because, as I say, solar eclipses have always taken people's imagination. It's been a very, very long time since they were a surprise. We have known how to calculate their occurrence for millennia. Um, but that hasn't stopped people from using them in political ways. It hasn't stopped people from using them in spiritual ways that took advantage of the fact that many people didn't realize it was going to happen. There are a number of fictional works where a character uses the coming of a solar eclipse that most people aren't aware of to give the impression that they possess magic over the sun. The great Polish novel Pharaoh um, has a scene where the high priesthood use uh, an eclipse to reassert their power politically because most people did not know it was coming and they were doing the astronomical calculations that told them it was. I don't know that that is actually something that would have happened in Egypt because people were a little more literate in these matters than I think the 19th century, which is the time of that novel's origin, were aware. But it certainly is something that has happened historically. Not everyone has always been able to calculate the coming of a solar eclipse or been aware of it, even if they were. And it can be quite shocking if you don't know that it's coming. In a lot of ancient cultures, it was a time of great fear because they didn't understand what was happening. They were not as astrologically developed as some others, and did not understand that this was a phenomenon that was going to pass. And while it happened, they worried about whether the sun was actually coming back or not. Now, Janet says, I will be traveling to another country to view the solar eclipse. And I will get about 3.5 minutes. That will be wonderful, Janet. I hope that that is very meaningful for you. And it would be wonderful if you can join our ritual at that time. It will be a simple thing because I know that well, crystal web rituals usually are. And I will probably be doing it live here on Corellian TV. And we will be attuning to that energy. We will be focusing that energy and our own energy, again, toward peace, love, rebirth. Um, we are at a time when society and the planet as a whole is very much in need of those energies. And by pulling the energy of the renewal embodied by the solar eclipse into the crystal web and focusing it in this direction, we hope that we can truly increase the dissemination of those energies. And, I have to say, and I've said this before, when I look at the Corellian Peace Campaign, which is 9 years old at this time, it can be a little bittersweet because I asked myself, has this actually been successful? Because the energies of fear and hatred in the world only seem to have increased during those 9 years. Uh, but Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood Janet. She was traveling to another county to view the solar eclipse, not another country. She'll be in Troy, Ohio. That will be lovely. But I look at how those energies have gone. We certainly did not turn them back. However, I cannot also help but think that we must have made a difference, that we are making a difference, and that we'd be in a worse place if we were not constantly focusing on the energies of peace and love. And our various peace warriors do monthly ceremonies and other ceremonies to raise and focus the energies of love and peace into the world. And I can only say that we do what we can, and hopefully this solar eclipse ritual will do a great deal. Will we will we see it immediately? Well, you don't normally see things immediately. They take their time to act in the world, although that is not always true. Um, but if there was a time that we need to focus love and peace and rebirth into the world, this certainly is one of those times. Now, I will say, and what I've been talking lately about Christian dominionism and the various threats that the future holds, but that's always to some extent true. We have a tendency to look back on our past and think that the past was somehow better than the present, and sometimes it was to certain degrees. But there are always problems. There are always occasions to fight for the good versus the bad. One of my favorite people, the Honorable Olivia Robertson, used to hate to hear people talk about the good old days because, as she put it, she was alive in the good old days and they weren't that good. They were good for some people, but a lot of people were in much worse situations than um, even today. And I think that it is important for us to remember that life is always about doing that next right thing. And hello to Lynn in the chat room. Um, it always offers us the opportunity to focus on the things that we believe in, the things we wish to see in the world we wish to build. Sometimes, as for example in World War II, the fight is a little more obvious than others, but there's always an aspect of that going on, and it doesn't really matter when you're looking at. When you look farther back in history, you don't always see it, but trust me, it was always there. And if you look a little farther, you'll find where people were fighting to build a better world, even if it might not be immediately obvious. And overall, I think that we have built a better world, and we certainly will continue to do so. Hello to Steve in the chat room. Um, and Bimby says, I always use the term just like the good old days sarcastically. And for the most part, yeah, um, the good old days, for the most part, were not all that great. Um, Not certainly not all that much better than these days, but what happens a lot of times is that people remember their childhood as having been a much better time because they themselves, in many cases, um, were not exposed to the difficulties in life at that age. They did not have responsibilities in the sense that an adult does. They were not aware of those things yet, and so they often don't realize that they were there. I sometimes talk about that meme that goes around the internet sometimes, complaining about Becky buying her sage at Whole Foods and how back in the day we'd have been horrified by that in the metaphysical community. And every time I see someone post that meme, I know they were not here back in the day because the truth is we would have loved to be able to get our metaphysical goods more easily than we could at that time. We would have loved to have had them in our local supermarket, for example. We would not have been horrified at all. And if you were actually there, I think you will know that um, for the most part. There might be an exception if you were in a major metropolitan area where you had easy access to metaphysical bookstores, but most people did not, and getting metaphysical supplies was not the easiest thing in the world. Of course, the other thing is if you were actually here back in the day, you would not have been looking for sage, at least not for the uses it's currently used for. because at that time you'd have been more likely to use something like frankincense or perhaps lavender for those purposes. But we were certainly still practicing purification with smoke. And sage did certainly have uh, ritual uses, including purification, even before it became the popular choice for general purification and cleansing. Getting back to our solar eclipse, um, one of the things that we have commonly done in our solar eclipse rituals is bless a particular stone with the energy of the solar eclipse so that we can continue to draw upon it. So, what I want to recommend that you do in the month before this ritual occurs is find yourself a stone that you can bless during the solar eclipse to absorb part of its energy, as well as sending the energy into the crystal web. So that you can have a direct connection to that energy, both through your crystal access point and through the stone that you can carry. And I recommend for that a solar stone, such as a sunstone or a citrine, but it can be whatever stone you have access to or desire. A perfectly good choice would be a clear crystal quartz, which is like the default stone for everything, in much the same way that a white candle is the default candle for everything. And that's perfectly fine. But if you get a stone that is already carrying a solar energy, there is a certain virtue to that too. We will be blessing those stones, we'll be charging them for that energy of love, peace, and rebirth. And if you go back to the Magic TV vaults about, oh, 12 years ago, give or take, we did a very similar ceremony, live broadcast, um, and we had charged stones during that ceremony and kept them on our altar at the Temple of Tituba. And I still possess those stones today. Um, and they helped carry forward the energy of the changes we worked for then and to keep us connected to it. We have charged stones from a number of other similar ceremonies. Now, Bimbi says, I have a giant agate that I found on the beach that I'm very partial to. I haven't found any indications in gem books. Is this an acceptable stone for this type of work as long as it's special to me? Absolutely, totally. And the stone that, when we create a crystal access point, which we've talked about in other Midday with Reverend Dons and various other places as well, throughout our Corellian TV history, we usually bury that in the earth. Not always, but usually. But when we bless a stone like this, that we're going to keep with us, we do not do that. We keep it with us. We keep it on our altar. Sometimes we can carry it on our person, depending on the size of the stone. So if you have a special stone like that that you feel would be appropriate to use, if it's calling to you for that purpose, by all means use it. And I tend to come from the point of view that if you feel that the stone is indicating it wishes to be used for a purpose, it doesn't matter whether it is the archetypal stone for that purpose. If it's telling you, then it's the stone. Um, there are all sorts of books on the subject of what stones are good for what, and that's certainly true. But it's not always true for every example of those stones. Sometimes they have very particular purposes that may not exactly align with what the general purpose of that stone will be. This is because stones, like people, are very individual. One of the things I talk about when talking about stones is the difference between a synthetic stone and a natural stone. And I know people who dislike the idea of synthetic stones. I am not one of them. In fact, I often recommend goldstone, which is a very traditional stone that's also completely synthetic. It's a kind of glass, although it's made from natural substances, and it works very well um, for metaphysical purposes. And I find that many synthetic stones do. Um, but it's also worth bearing in mind that when I talk about synthetic stones, I may be talking about something like goldstone or something like a created stone. Um, Let me see if I have something handy to. Well, let's look at this one. This is a garnet, um, probably a lab created garnet, which would make it arguably synthetic. But the difference between a lab created stone and a natural stone is that the lab created stone is going to be much more archetypal, and a natural stone is going to be much more idiosyncratic. So, something like the stone that Bimby found at the beach um, will undoubtedly have the normal energies you expect from an agate, which are to some extent determined by the colors involved. But it may also be very idiosyncratic in its energies. Whereas a lab created stone, such as this, is going to be much more archetypal for what you'd expect a garnet to do. And a synthetic stone, such as this, is going to be much more uniform in its energies. And for some things that's good, and for some things it's not. It depends what you're doing. Um, Let me see. This is a turquoise. And it does not want to show in front of the green screen, but it is a turquoise, and it is a natural stone, and yeah, it's not going to do any good if I hold it closer. Um, it is, to my eyes, it's blue in color, but it must have enough. It has a good bit of green in it, which is why it's dropping out. But it also has white and black um, striations, and those give it its own individual character, its own individual energy. So it has the things you expect from a turquoise, but its own individual character. Working with stones um, can be quite interesting in that way, in terms of how you interact with their energies. Um, and again, I'm a believer that lab created stones work as well as natural stones, but a little differently, and synthetic stones also can work very well in metaphysics, but again, a little differently. And it's a matter of knowing what you're working with and how you work with them. And Jana says, I have a vial with stones and herbs related to the sun. The vial contains chamomile, sunstone chips, cinnamon, and paprika. And that would be ideal to use if you wish to use that. The presence of the herbs along with the stones does not, in my opinion, cause any problem. Um, And in fact, in general, if you wanted to take the stone that you bless along with the ceremony and combine it with other things such as herbs um, in a special bottle or vial, that would be perfectly fine. So, again, this ceremony will be coming up on April 8th. We'll be doing more broadcasts about it before we get there to help you to prepare. And with that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank you for joining me. Tomorrow, our guest will be Ed the Pagan, and we're going to be talking a little bit more on that subject of pagan power. We're going to be talking about the first class that has happened and the second one that is coming, and I think that you'll find it fascinating. Um, so, with that, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to attune to the energies of the universe and to move forward in the ways that are easiest and most helpful to our lives. Help us to draw upon all the forces around us to create the better world we wish to see, as well as our own inner forces. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you are always with us, We thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I'll see you tomorrow, and may you be blessed now